Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Thomas Whitmore, and I've been a park ranger for 18 years. Before that, I spent 20 years underground in the coal mines, just like my daddy and his daddy before him. I know caves and tunnels better than most folks know their own backyards. I'm telling you this because what happened in November of 1974 changed everything I thought I knew about the mountains. I was stationed at Jefferson National Forest in Virginia, working the Grayson Highlands section. It's beautiful country up there. Rolling hills covered in rhododendron thickets, limestone cliffs that catch the morning light just right, and caves. Lots of caves. The Cherokee used to call this area the Breathing Mountain, though I never paid much attention to old stories. To me, caves were just geology, limestone worn away by water over millions of years. Nothing more mysterious than that. My specialty was cave rescue. When folks got lost or hurt underground, they called me. I'd mapped most of the cave systems in our section, knew every passage and chamber. My partner Dave Sullivan used to joke that I could find my way through those tunnels blindfolded. Maybe I should have listened closer to those Cherokee warnings. It was a cold November morning when the call came in. 6 college students from Virginia Tech had gone spelunking in Deep Holler. That's what locals called the Big Limestone Valley, about 8 miles from the nearest settlement. They'd been due back 2 days ago. Their professor, Dr. Robert Hayes, was worried sick. "They're good kids," he told me over the radio. "Jennifer Walsh is one of my best geology students. They know cave safety." Dave and I loaded up our gear, carbide lamps, manila rope, first aid supplies, the works. The weather was turning nasty, with fog banks settling into the valleys like gray soup. Radio signals couldn't get through the ridge lines up there, so we'd be on our own once we went in. Deep Holler sits at about 2,800 feet elevation. It's a narrow valley carved between 2 limestone ridges, thick with mountain laurel and rhododendron bushes that grow so dense you can barely push through them. There's an old mine entrance from 1922 that was sealed up after a disaster killed 12 men. The main cave entrance sits about halfway up the eastern slope, a dark mouth in the rock face about 6 feet high and 4 feet wide. We hiked in through the morning mist, our boots crunching on frost-covered leaves. The air was sharp and clean, the way mountain air gets right before winter sets in. Everything seemed normal, birds singing, squirrels chattering in the oak trees, the usual forest sounds. But when we reached the cave entrance, something felt wrong. The first thing I noticed was the temperature. It was maybe 30 degrees outside, cold enough to see your breath. But warm air was flowing out of that cave entrance like it was heated. Not just a little warm. I'm talking maybe 45 degrees warmer than the frecked outside air. "That's strange," Dave said, holding his hand near the opening. "Geothermal activity?" I'd been in hundreds of caves, and they usually stay a constant temperature year-round. Cool in summer, warmer than outside in winter, but never this much warmer. This felt like standing near a furnace. The second thing that bothered me was the air current. In most caves, cold air sinks and flows out the lower openings, while warm air rises and flows out higher up. But here, warm air was flowing straight out horizontally against basic physics. "Maybe there's another entrance higher up, creating a thermal current," I told Dave, but even as I said it, I didn't believe it. I'd mapped this system 3 times. There was no higher entrance. We checked our gear one more time. Carbide lamps were full and burning bright. Ropes were dry and tested. We had enough supplies for 12 hours underground. I'd done this hundreds of times before. "Ready?" Dave asked. I nodded, but something in my gut was telling me to turn around and hike back down the mountain. Instead, I stepped into that warm, dark mouth and felt the mountain swallow me whole. The passage sloped downward at a gentle angle, about 7 feet high and 5 feet wide. Our carbide lamps threw dancing shadows on the limestone walls, and our boots echoed in the tunnel ahead. The rock was typical for this area. Gray limestone with streaks of darker minerals, worn smooth by thousands of years of water flow. But it was still unnaturally warm. "Students came through here," Dave said, pointing his lamp at scuff marks on the cave floor. Fresh boot prints in the mud. We followed the prints deeper into the mountain. The main passage split into 3 tunnels about 200 yards in. This was where most people got confused and lost. I'd been here before. The left tunnel led to a dead end. The middle one went to a large chamber with a small underground pool, and the right tunnel connected to the deeper cave system. The boot prints went right. They knew where they were going, I said. Hayes must have given them good directions. We followed the right tunnel as it curved and twisted through the limestone. The walls were damp with condensation, which was normal, but my rope felt wet when it should have been dry. Our carbide lamps flickered every few minutes, even though the tanks were full of fuel. Equipment's acting up, Dave muttered, adjusting his lamp. Might be some kind of gas in here affecting the flame. After about half an hour of walking, we reached the main chamber, a big room about 30 feet across and 20 feet high, with flowstone formations hanging from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. This was usually as far as casual cavers went, but the students' tracks kept going, into a passage on the far side that led to the deeper system. That's when we found the first piece of gear. Jennifer Walsh's geology textbook was sitting on a ledge near the passage entrance, along with a small hammer used for chipping rock samples. They were positioned carefully, like someone had set them down to examine something. Why would she leave her book here? Dave asked. I picked up the textbook and flipped through it. Page 127 was bookmarked, a chapter about limestone cave formation. In the margin, someone had written in pencil, "Impossible formations, walls too smooth, curves too perfect." A chill ran down my spine despite the warm air. We pressed deeper into the mountain, following the students' trail. The passage got narrower, forcing us to duck in places. The walls were strange here, too smooth, like they'd been polished. Most limestone caves have rough, jagged surfaces where water has carved irregular channels. These walls looked almost organic, like the inside of something living. "Tom," Dave called from up ahead. "You need to see this." I squeezed through a tight section and found him standing in front of what should have been a solid wall. But there was an opening, a perfect oval passage about 5 feet high, smooth as glass on all sides. "This wasn't on your maps," Dave said. He was right. I'd mapped this section personally 3 years ago. There had been no passage here, just solid limestone. Caves don't just grow new tunnels overnight. "Maybe we took a wrong turn," I said, but I knew we hadn't. Fresh boot prints led into the oval passage. The students had come this way, following a tunnel that shouldn't exist. We crawled through the opening and found ourselves in another chamber, smaller than the first but with the same smooth walls. The air was even warmer here, and it moved with a rhythm, flowing in and out like breathing. That's when Dave found the second piece of gear. A student's backpack was sitting in the middle of the chamber, neatly positioned as if someone had carefully placed it there. Inside were sandwiches, water bottles, a camera, and climbing gear. Everything was there except the student. Jennifer Walsh was written on the name tag. I picked up the camera and checked the film counter. 24 pictures had been taken. The last few shots were still in the camera, but I couldn't develop them here in the cave. "Where is she?" Dave whispered. That's when I noticed the other thing wrong with the chamber. The walls weren't just smooth. They had patterns in them, like veins or arteries running through the stone, and in the lamplight, I could swear they were moving, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. I reached out to touch one of the patterns, and the rock was warm. Not cave cool like limestone should be, but body warm, like living flesh. "Dave," I said quietly, "we need to get out of here." But when I turned around, the oval passage we'd crawled through was gone. The wall was solid limestone, with no sign there had ever been an opening. We were trapped inside the mountain, and something was very wrong with this cave. I ran my hands over the wall where the passage had been, feeling for any crack or opening. Nothing. Just solid rock, warm to the touch. "This is impossible," Dave said, his voice tight with fear. "Rock doesn't just seal itself up." I tried to stay calm, think like a professional. There must be another way out. Caves always have multiple passages. But even as I said it, I could feel the walls around us. They seemed closer than before, like the chamber was slowly shrinking. The rhythmic breathing of the air currents was getting stronger, more obvious. We found another passage in the far corner. Not the smooth oval we'd entered through, but a natural-looking crack in the limestone. We squeezed through and found ourselves in a twisting tunnel that branched in 3 directions. "Which way?" Dave asked. The students' tracks were harder to follow here. The floor was different, not the usual cave dirt and gravel, but something softer, almost spongy. When I knelt down to examine it closer, I realized it felt like tissue, like the inside of something alive. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. "What is it?" I couldn't explain what I was seeing. The floor of the tunnel looked like stone, but it gave slightly under pressure, and it was warm. There were no rock formations here that could explain it. We followed the middle passage, our carbide lamps throwing wild shadows on the walls. The tunnel curved and twisted like intestines, and the air moved with that same rhythmic breathing. Every few minutes, our lights would flicker, and in those moments of dimness, I could swear the walls moved. After 20 minutes of walking, we found the first body. Jennifer Walsh was embedded in the cave wall like she was part of the rock itself. Her arms and legs stuck out from the limestone, but her torso had somehow been absorbed into the stone. Her face was peaceful, like she was sleeping, but her skin had turned the gray color of limestone. Dave stumbled backward, his lamp shaking in his hand. What the hell happened to her? I forced myself to examine the scene professionally, though every instinct told me to run. The stone around Jennifer's body was different from normal limestone, softer, more like cartilage than rock. And it was warm. "The cave did this," I said, though I couldn't believe my own words. "Caves don't eat people, Tom." But the evidence was right in front of us. Somehow, this mountain had absorbed a living person into its walls. And if it could do that to Jennifer Walsh, it could do it to us. We found more gear scattered through the tunnels, climbing ropes, water bottles, a spare lamp, but no more bodies. Just equipment left behind, like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale. The passages kept changing. Tunnels that led one direction suddenly opened into chambers we'd never seen before. Walls that had been solid rock grew new openings. The cave was rearranging itself around us, like a living thing adjusting its internal organs. "We're lost," Dave said, after an hour of wandering through shifting passages. I checked my compass. The needle spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. My watch had stopped working. Even the air felt thick and strange, like breathing soup. That's when we heard the voices. "Help us! We're down here!" The shouts echoed from somewhere deeper in the cave system. The remaining students, they were still alive. Dave and I looked at each other. Every rational part of my brain said we should try to find our own way out, get help from the surface. But those kids were trapped down here with whatever this thing was. "We have to try," Dave said. We followed the voices deeper into the mountain, through passages that shouldn't exist, past walls that pulsed like living tissue. The temperature kept rising. My shirt was soaked with sweat, and the air was so thick I could barely breathe. The voices led us to a large chamber, maybe 50 feet across, with a domed ceiling that curved up into darkness. In the center was a depression in the floor, not carved by water, but perfectly round and smooth like a mouth. 4 students huddled against the far wall. They looked terrified, exhausted, like they'd been running for hours. "Thank God," one of them called out. "We've been trapped down here since yesterday. The passages keep changing." I started toward them, but Dave grabbed my arm. "Look at the floor," he whispered. Between us and the students, the limestone floor wasn't solid. It moved slightly, rippling like water. And in the center, that round depression was opening and closing slowly, like something breathing. "Don't move," I called to the students. "Stay exactly where you are." That's when the cave decided it was hungry. The walls around the students began to bulge inward, growing soft and flexible. One of the boys tried to run, but the floor beneath his feet turned, liquid. He sank in up to his knees, then his waist, the limestone flowing around him like thick mud. "Help me," he screamed, but there was nothing we could do. The cave was digesting him alive. The boy disappeared into the floor with a wet sucking sound. The limestone closed over him like water, leaving only smooth stone behind. The other 3 students pressed against the far wall, sobbing. "What is this place?" one of them whispered. I finally understood what we were dealing with. This wasn't a cave system at all. It was some kind of living organism that had grown inside the mountain. The passages were like arteries and veins. The warm air was its breathing, and it fed on calcium, Werder, the calcium in human bones. It's alive, I told Dave. The whole cave system, it's one big organism. The round depression in the center of the chamber opened wider, revealing rows of limestone teeth. Not carved stone, actual teeth that had grown from the cave floor. The breathing, the sound got louder, more urgent, like the thing was excited about feeding. "We have to get those kids out of here," Dave said. But as soon as he spoke, the walls around us began to move. The chamber was shrinking, the ceiling lowering, the floor tilting toward that awful mouth in the center. The cave had heard us talking and decided we were all going to be dinner. I grabbed my rope and threw one end to the students. "Tie this around your waist. We're going to pull you across." The first student, a girl with brown hair, caught the rope. But as she tied it around herself, the wall behind her began to bulge outward like a pregnant belly. Something was moving inside the stone, something large. The wall burst open, and a mass of limestone tentacles shot out, wrapping around the girl's legs. She screamed as they pulled her backward into the rock. The rope went tight in my hands, then snapped. "The whole mountain is alive," Dave whispered. "We're inside some kind of monster." The ceiling kept lowering. Soon, we'd be crushed against the floor, or fed into that grinding mouth in the center. The two remaining students huddled together, crying. That's when I remembered the underground river. Every cave system in this area was connected to the water table. There had to be a stream somewhere, flowing toward the outside. Water was the one thing that could carve through limestone, the one thing this organism couldn't control completely. "Dave, the water, can you hear it?" He stopped and listened. Underneath the breathing sounds and the grinding of limestone teeth, there was a faint trickling noise coming from one of the side passages. "This way." We ran toward the sound as the chamber collapsed behind us. The passage was narrow and getting narrower, the walls pressing in from both sides. I could hear Dave grunting as he squeezed through gaps barely wide enough for our bodies. The trickling got louder. Cool air started mixing with the warm, organic smell of the cave creature. We were getting close to the outside, but the passage ahead was blocked by a wall of soft, pink limestone that pulsed like a heart. The organism was trying to seal off its own arteries to prevent us from escaping. "We have to break through," I said. Dave pulled out his geological hammer and started pounding on the soft stone. It gave way like flesh, bleeding a clear fluid that smelled like sulfur. Behind it was another barrier, then another. The cave was screaming now, a low, grinding sound that came from everywhere at once. It knew we were escaping, and it didn't like it. We broke through the final barrier and tumbled into an underground stream. The water was ice-cold and moving fast, flowing toward the outside of the mountain. Behind us, the passage we'd come through sealed itself with a wet, slurping sound. "Hold on to me," I told Dave. "Don't let the current separate us." We let the stream carry us through narrow channels, carved in real limestone, not the fake, living stone of the organism, but actual rock formed millions of years ago. The water was so cold it numbed my hands and feet, but it was carrying us away from that hungry mouth in the mountain. After what felt like hours, I saw gray light ahead. Natural light, not the yellow glow of our carbide lamps. We burst out of a small opening in the mountainside and tumbled into a pool at the bottom of Deep Holler. Real air, real sky, real cold November wind. I'd never been so happy to feel frost on my face. Dave was unconscious, hypothermic from the cold water. I dragged him to shore and started CPR, pumping his chest until he coughed up stream water and started breathing again. That's when I looked back at the cave entrance. It was gone. The mouth in the limestone cliff had sealed itself completely, leaving only smooth rock, like it had never existed at all. It took us 6 hours to hike out of Deep Holler. Dave was in bad shape, hypothermia, exhaustion, and trauma that would take years to heal. I wasn't much better. By the time we reached the ranger station, both of us were babbling about living caves and limestone monsters. The official report said there had been a geological collapse. Unstable limestone formations had shifted, trapping the 6 students in an underground chamber where they suffocated from lack of oxygen. The cave system was declared too dangerous for public access and sealed with concrete. But I know what really happened down there. Dr. Hayes tried to sue the Park Service, claiming we hadn't done enough to rescue his students. The lawsuit was quietly dropped when government geologists explained that the entire cave system had restructured itself due to seismic activity. They used a lot of scientific words to describe something they didn't understand. Dave transferred to a desk job in Richmond. He couldn't handle being underground anymore, couldn't even ride elevators without having panic attacks. Sometimes he calls me late at night, asking if I think it's still down there, still hungry. I know it is. I transferred to Death Valley, where there are no caves, no limestone, nothing but open desert and honest rock that doesn't breathe or move or eat people. But even here, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night feeling like walls are closing in around me. The Cherokee were right about the breathing mountain. They knew to stay away from certain places, certain hollows where the stone was alive and hungry. We should have listened to their warnings. 3 weeks after the cave was sealed, there was a small earthquake in the Grayson Highlands. Nothing serious, just a 3.2 on the Richter scale. But I know what caused it. The organism was adjusting to its concrete prison, growing new passages, looking for another way to feed. Sometimes hikers still report strange things in deep holler. Warm air flowing from solid rock faces. Sounds like breathing coming from inside the mountain. Limestone formations that seem to move when you're not looking directly at them. If you ever find yourself in cave country, Kentucky, Virginia, Tennessee, anywhere with limestone formations and DIT, remember this story. If a cave feels too warm, if the air moves like breathing, if the walls seem too smooth and perfect, get out. Get out fast and don't look back. Because some mountains are hungry, and they're always looking for their next meal. The concrete seal we put over that cave entrance won't hold forever. Limestone is patient. It thinks in geological time, measuring its meals in decades instead of minutes. Sooner or later, it will find a way out. When it does, it will be very, very hungry. My name is Thomas Whitmore, and I'm telling you this so you'll know what to watch for. The mountains are full of things that shouldn't be alive but are. Trust the old stories. Trust the Cherokee warnings. And if you hear a mountain breathing, run. My name is Michael Brennan, and I've been a park ranger for 13 years. People always ask me about the worst thing I've seen out there in the wilderness. Most expect stories about bear attacks or people falling off cliffs. They never expect what I'm about to tell you. It was December 1982 when the Henderson family went missing. 4 people size elf, mom, dad, and 2 kids, ages 12 and 8. They'd gotten permits for primitive camping in the Cataract Falls area of the Great Smoky Mountains. Good folks from Nashville. The dad was a doctor, experienced hiker. The kind who followed rules and checked in on time. When they missed their check-in by 18 hours, we knew something was wrong. I drew the assignment along with Julie Martinez, my partner for the past 3 years. Julie was tough, former Army MP who'd seen her share of bad situations. If she was worried about something, you knew it was serious. Weather's been decent, she said as we loaded our packs. No storms, no flash flood warnings. Trail conditions are good. I checked my radio one more time. The new Motorola HT 220 seconds were supposed to work better in the mountains, but the Cataract Falls area was still a dead zone. Too many ridges and valleys. We'd be on our own until we made it back to high ground. The trailhead was empty, except for the Hendersons' blue Toyota pickup. Their gear looked professional, good boots, quality packs, the works. These weren't weekend warriors who'd gotten in over their heads. Permit says they plan to camp near the old settlement ruins, Julie said, studying the paperwork. About 8 miles in. I knew the area. Back in the 1930 seconds, there'd been a small mountain community there, maybe 30 families. The government bought them out when they created the park, relocated everyone down to Gatlinburg. Most folks went willingly, but there were stories about the last few families. Stories about strange lights in the woods and children who went missing. Of course, I didn't believe any of that nonsense. Will-o-wisps were just swamp gas igniting naturally. Mountain folk told stories to explain things they couldn't understand. The trail started easy enough, well-maintained path through second-growth forest. But as we climbed higher, the trees got older and bigger. These were the real mountains, the kind that had stood here since before humans ever set foot in North America. After about 3 hours, we found their first campsite. They'd followed protocol perfectly, used the designated camping area, hung their food properly, even scattered the cold ashes from their fire. A piece of paper under a rock showed they'd planned to push deeper into the valley the next day. "They're exploring off-trail," Julie said, "looking for the ruins." That made sense. The old settlement was marked on our maps, but the trail to it had been officially closed for years. Too dangerous, unstable structures, old well holes, that sort of thing. But experienced hikers often went anyway. We followed game trails and the occasional scrap of surveyor's tape deeper into the valley. The temperature seemed to drop with every step, even though we were losing elevation. My breath started showing in little white puffs. "You notice how quiet it is?" Julie asked. She was right. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter, no insects buzzing. Even our footsteps seemed muffled, like the forest was holding its breath. Around 4 in the afternoon, we found them, or what was left of their second camp. The scene made my stomach turn. Their tent was shredded, not torn from outside, but slashed from the inside, like something had tried to claw its way out. Sleeping bags were ripped open, down feathers scattered everywhere. Cooking gear lay scattered across a wide area, some of it hanging from tree branches 15 feet off the ground. "Jesus," Julie whispered. "What could do this?" I'd seen bear attacks before. This wasn't a bear. Bears knocked down tents and scattered food, but they didn't arrange things in patterns. And they definitely didn't hang a camping stove from a tree branch like some kind of twisted Christmas ornament. Julie found blood on the ground, not much, just a few drops near the ruined tent. We bagged samples and took photos with my Polaroid camera. Standard procedure, but nothing about this felt standard. "There," Julie pointed toward a gap in the trees. "Something's moving." I looked where she was pointing and saw it, a soft greenish glow about 50 yards away, drifting between the tree trunks like a lantern carried by someone walking very slowly. "Hello," I called out. "Park Service, we're here to help." The light stopped moving. For a moment, it seemed to pulse brighter. Then it faded away completely. "Could be one of them," Julie said, "maybe hurt, using a flashlight." But something felt wrong about that light. It had moved too smoothly, too quietly. And what kind of flashlight glowed green? We followed in the direction we'd seen it, using our own lights to pick our way through the darkening forest. The ruins of the old settlement appeared gradually, stone foundations poking through decades of leaf litter. The remains of a chimney standing like a lonely monument. And there, in what had once been the main street of a mountain community, we found something that made us both stop dead in our tracks. Fresh footprints in the dirt. Small ones, like those made by children, but the prints were glowing with the same soft green light we'd seen moving through the trees. Julie knelt down and held her flashlight close to the prints. "Mike, look at this." The footprints were definitely from children, maybe size 2 and size 4 shoes, like the Henderson kids would wear. But they glowed with a phosphorescent light that seemed to come from inside the dirt itself. As we watched, the glow slowly faded until they looked like normal footprints. "Some kind of chemical reaction," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Maybe they stepped in something." But even as I said it, I knew it didn't make sense. What would 2 missing kids be doing, wandering around an abandoned settlement in the dark? And where were their parents? We followed the prints deeper into the ruins. Most of the buildings were long gone, but you could still make out the layout of the old community. Here was where the general store had been. There, the schoolhouse. My flashlight beam picked out rusted pieces of farm equipment and the remains of split-rail fences. The footprints led us to what looked like it had been the largest house in the settlement. Only the stone foundation remained, but it was big, probably belonged to whoever ran the community. The glowing prints circled the foundation 3 times, then headed straight for what looked like a root cellar built into the hillside behind the house. "You smell that?" Julie asked. I did. Something sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in water. It was coming from the direction of the root cellar. "Henderson family," I called out. "If you can hear me, call back. We're park rangers." Silence, not even an echo. Julie pulled out her radio and tried to raise the station. Nothing but static. She adjusted the frequency and tried again. More static, but this time it almost sounded like voices, children's voices, singing something I couldn't quite make out. "You hearing that?" she asked. I took the radio and listened. The static rose and fell like waves, and in between, there were definitely sounds that could be voices. High-pitched, like kids singing a nursery rhyme. Equipment malfunction, I said. Mountains play hell with radio signals. But my hands were shaking as I handed the radio back. We approached the root cellar carefully. The wooden door had rotted away long ago, leaving a dark opening that our flashlights couldn't quite penetrate. The smell got stronger as we got closer. Not just rotting flowers now, but something else underneath. Something that reminded me of the morgue back when I was a Navy medic. I'll go first, I said. Like hell you will. We go together or not at all. Julie was right. We clicked on our backup flashlights and stepped into the cellar together. The space was bigger than I'd expected, maybe 10 feet square, with stone walls and a dirt floor. Wooden shelves lined the walls, though most had collapsed under years of moisture and neglect. But that's not what made us both gasp. The floor was covered with small bones, not animal bones. These were too delicate, too precisely arranged. Someone had laid them out in patterns, spirals and circles, like some kind of ritual design. And scattered among the bones were pieces of children's clothing, a faded blue dress, tiny leather shoes, a miniature wool coat that might have been red once upon a time. How long you think these have been here? Julie whispered. I knelt down and examined the bones more closely. They were old, decades old, maybe longer. Some were starting to crumble, but they'd been protected from the weather, and the arrangement looked fresh. Since the settlement was abandoned, maybe, 1934. I stood up and played my light around the walls. Could be children who died in the epidemic. What epidemic? Local stories say there was some kind of sickness that killed a bunch of kids right before the government relocated everyone. That's why some families were reluctant to leave. They didn't want to abandon their children's graves. But even as I explained it, I knew something was wrong with that theory. Families might bury their children, but they wouldn't arrange their bones in patterns like this. And they certainly wouldn't keep coming back for 50 years to maintain the arrangement. Julie was examining one of the walls. Mike, come look at this. On the stone wall, someone had carved words in rough letters. The lights took them. They come when dark falls cross, running water to be safe. Tell everyone to stay away below the words. Someone had scratched a date, the 15th of October, 1934. Day before the last families were supposed to leave, I said. According to the park records. Lights? Julie said. What lights? Before I could answer, our flashlights started flickering. Both of them, at the same time. The beams grew dim, then bright, then dim again, like the batteries were dying. But I'd put fresh batteries in that morning. We need to get out of here, Julie said. I agreed. Something about the root cellar felt wrong, not just the bones and the message, but the air itself. It was too cold, too thick, like trying to breathe underwater. We climbed out of the cellar and back into the night air. I checked my watch, 8:30 p.m. We'd been underground for maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. Look, Julie pointed back, toward the ruined settlement. Lights were moving between the foundations. Not one light like we'd seen before, but several maybe 6 or 8, drifting slowly through the ruins like paper lanterns carried by invisible hands. They glowed with the same greenish light we'd seen in the footprints. Hello, I called out again. We're here to help. Are you the Henderson family? The lights stopped moving. For a moment, they hung in the air like stars fallen to earth. Then, slowly, they began moving toward us. Mike? Julie's voice was tight with fear. Those aren't flashlights. She was right. The lights moved too smoothly, too quietly. And as they got closer, I could see they weren't being carried full 10. They were floating about 3 feet off the ground, moving through the air like they weighed nothing at all. We backed away, step by step, until we reached the tree line. The lights followed us to the edge of the ruins, then stopped. They hovered there, pulsing gently, almost like they were breathing. What do you think they want? Julie whispered. I didn't answer, because I was starting to suspect I knew. And the thought made my blood run cold. One of the lights began to change. The green glow grew brighter, and I could swear I saw something inside it, a shape, pale and small. A face. A child's face. Run, I said. What? Run. We crashed through the underbrush like spooked deer, our flashlight beams bouncing wildly as we ran. Behind us, I could hear something following, not footsteps, but a sound like wind through leaves, even though the night was perfectly still. Julie stumbled and went down hard. I helped her up, and when we turned back, the lights were there. All of them. They'd somehow gotten ahead of us and now hung in the air between us and the trail out of the valley. Up close, they were even worse than I'd imagined. Each light was about the size of a basketball, glowing with that sickly green phosphorescence. And inside each one, barely visible through the glow, was the outline of a child. Their faces were pale as moonlight, eyes dark as empty holes. "The kids from the settlement," Julie breathed. "The ones who died in 1934. One of the lights drifted closer. As it approached, the temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. My skin felt like I'd stuck my hand in a freezer. The child inside the light looked like a girl, maybe 8 years old. She wore a dress that might have been white once, and her hair hung in limp tangles around her face. When she opened her mouth, no sound came out, but I could read her lips. Asterisk, help us. Asterisk, they're dead, I whispered. They've been dead for 50 years. But even as I said it, I felt sorry for them. Whatever had happened to these children, whatever kept them trapped here, it wasn't their fault. The girl light reached out toward me with what looked like a hand. Without thinking, I started to reach back. "Don't touch it!" Julie grabbed my arm and yanked me backward. "Remember the message in the cellar. These things took the other children." She was right. My sympathy was making me stupid. These might look like lost children, but they'd been dead for half a century, and something had turned them into this. We backed away again, and the lights let us go. But they followed at a distance, keeping pace as we made our way through the dark forest. Every few minutes, one would drift closer, and the cold would hit us like a physical blow. My radio crackled to life. Through the static, I heard a voice. "Please, help. We're so cold." It was a child's voice. A girl. "Amanda Henderson?" I called into the radio. "Is that you? Where are you?" More static then. "The lights, they're so pretty. They want us to come with them." "Amanda, don't go with the lights. Stay where you are. We're coming to get you." But the radio went dead, nothing but empty static. We picked up our pace, following what I hoped was the trail back toward the Hendersons' destroyed campsite. Maybe the kids had gotten separated from their parents somehow. Maybe they were still alive, hiding somewhere in the forest. It took us an hour to find the campsite again. The torn tent and scattered gear looked even worse in the darkness, like the scene of some terrible battle. "Over here," Julie called. She was standing at the edge of the clearing, shining her light down at something on the ground. When I joined her, I saw what she'd found. It was Amanda Henderson, the 12-year-old girl from the missing family. She lay on her back in a bed of ferns, arms folded across her chest like she was sleeping. Her clothes were neat and clean, not a tear or stain on them. Her blonde hair was combed straight and smooth. But her skin was white as paper, and when I knelt down to check for a pulse, she was cold as ice. "No wounds," Julie said, running her flashlight over the pressed body. "No signs of trauma. Looks like she just laid down and died." I rolled up Amanda's sleeve to check her arm. No needle marks, no bruises, nothing to indicate how she'd died. But there was something else. Faint marks on her skin that glowed with the same phosphorescent light we'd seen in the footprints. Handprints, small handprints, like those made by children. They covered her arms, her neck, her face, dozens of them, overlapping and glowing faintly in the darkness. "They touched her," I said. "The lights, they touched her and somehow drained her," Julie finished. "Sucked the life right out of her." I checked Amanda's pockets and found a small notebook. The last entry was dated 2 days ago. Asterisk, "The lights are so beautiful. They look like children playing in the forest. Mom and Dad say to stay away, but they seem lonely. They keep calling to us. Tommy wants to go with them. I think maybe we should. They promise it won't hurt." Asterisk, my hands were shaking. As I closed the notebook, "Where are the rest of them? The parents and the boy?" "Maybe they got away," Julie said. But she didn't sound convinced. A new sound drifted through the forest. A man's voice, calling from somewhere deeper in the valley. "Amanda, Tommy, where are you?" Dr. Henderson, still looking for his children. We have to warn him, I said. We followed the voice, moving as quickly as we dared through the dark forest. The lights followed us, sometimes visible through the trees, sometimes hidden, but I could always feel them watching. We found Dr. Henderson about a quarter mile from the campsite, standing in a small clearing and calling his children's names. He was a big man, maybe 6'2", broad shoulders, but he looked small and lost in the vast darkness of the forest. Dr. Henderson, I called out. Park Service, we're here to help. He spun around, relief flooding his face when he saw our flashlights. Thank God. Have you seen my baddie? Children? They wandered off this morning, and we can't find them anywhere. Where's your wife? Julie asked. His face fell. Sarah. She went after the lights. Said she could hear Amanda calling for help. That was hours ago. What lights? I asked, though I already knew. These strange glowing things. They've been following us since yesterday. At first we thought they were just, I don't know, some kind of natural phenomenon. But they seem almost intelligent. They move like they have purpose. I looked at Julie. We had to tell him about Amanda, but how do you tell a father that his daughter is dead? Dr. Henderson, I began. We found Amanda. I'm sorry, but... The lights appeared in the clearing, all of them, surrounding us in a circle of cold green glow. Dr. Henderson's eyes went wide. There, he pointed. Those are the lights. Can you see them too? We could see them. And now we could see something else. Shapes moving inside the lights. Not just children anymore. One of the lights was bigger than the others, and inside it was the pale outline of a woman with long hair. Sarah Henderson. Sarah, Dr. Henderson started toward the light. Sarah, is that you? Don't. I grabbed his arm. Don't touch them. But it was too late. Dr. Henderson broke free and reached toward the light that held his wife. The moment his fingers made contact, he screamed. The scream only lasted a second. Then Dr. Henderson collapsed to the ground, his hair gone white, his face aged 20 years in an instant. He was still breathing, but barely. The light that had been Sarah Henderson drifted closer. Through the glow, I could see her face, beautiful and terrible, her mouth open in a silent scream of hunger. Run, I whispered to Julie. This time, we didn't argue. We grabbed Dr. Henderson under his arms and dragged him toward the tree line. He was conscious but weak, muttering about the cold and how tired he felt. The lights followed us, but they seemed to be moving slower now, like they were full. Fed. The creek, I said, remembering the message carved in the cellar wall. We need to find running water. We could hear it before we saw it, the sound of water flowing over rocks. A small stream, maybe 3 feet wide, cutting through the valley floor. The moment we crossed it, the lights stopped. They hovered on the other side, pulsing with frustration, but they wouldn't cross the water. Dr. Henderson was dying. I could see it in his eyes. The same look I'd seen in combat when someone was too far gone to save. But he managed to whisper a few words. Tommy, still out there, find him. Then he closed his eyes and didn't open them again. Julie and I sat beside Dr. Henderson's body for a long time, watching the lights hover on the other side of the creek. Every few minutes, one would drift close to the water's edge, but none of them would cross. Iron, I said, remembering. Something from an old folklore class I'd taken in college. Running water and iron, traditional protections against spirits. You believe that's what they are? Spirits? I looked at the lights, men, 8-year-old faces trapped in green fire, condemned to an eternity of hunger. I believe that whatever happened to those children in 1934, it changed them into something else. Something that feeds on life energy. And now they're doing the same thing to the Henderson family. The thought of 8-year-old Tommy Henderson, alone somewhere in the forest with those things hunting him, made me sick. But what could we do? We had no weapons that could hurt creatures made of light and hunger. My radio crackled. Help, please, I'm scared. Tommy's voice, weak and frightened. Tommy, I called into the radio. This is Ranger Brennan, where are you? I don't know. It's dark. The lights keep coming closer. Tommy, listen to me. You need to find water, a stream, or creek. The lights can't cross running water. Do you understand? Static. Then, I can hear water. But the lights are between me and it. I looked at Julie. We both knew what we had to do. We have to go back, I said. Draw them away from him. That's suicide, Mike. You saw what they did to Dr. Henderson. Then we'll be careful. Stay together, don't let them touch us. But we can't leave that boy alone out there. Julie was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. How do we find him? Follow the radio signal, and hope we get lucky. We left Dr. Henderson's body by the creek and headed back into the forest. The lights immediately began following us again, but they kept their distance. Maybe they were still satisfied from feeding on the other family members. Or maybe they were waiting for something. The radio signal got stronger as we moved deeper into the valley, toward the heart of the old settlement. Tommy's voice came through more clearly. They're all around me. I can see faces in the lights. Kids like me. Tommy, keep talking. We're trying to find you. One of them looks like Amanda. But it's not really her, is it? Smart kid. No, Tommy, it's not really your sister. Don't listen to anything they say. We found him in the ruins of the old schoolhouse, crouched behind the remains of a stone wall. He was maybe 50 yards from the nearest creek, but the lights had him completely surrounded. They floated in a circle around his hiding place, pulsing gently, like they were playing some kind of game. Tommy Henderson was 8 years old, skinny, with his father's dark hair. His clothes were torn and dirty, and his eyes were wide with terror, but he was alive. Tommy, I called. Stay right where you are, don't move. The lights turned toward us. 8 child faces in 8 orbs of green fire, and now I could see them clearly. They'd been beautiful children once, boys and girls with bright eyes and happy smiles. Death had changed them into something hungry and hollow. One of them was Amanda Henderson. Her light drifted toward us, and I could hear her voice in my head. Asterisk, why won't you let us play? We're so lonely. We just want friends. Asterisk, you're dead, I said out loud. You've been dead for 50 years. Let the boy go. Asterisk, dead? Asterisk, Amanda's light pulsed brighter. Asterisk, we're not dead. We're just different, cold, hungry. But we can fix that. We can be warm again. Asterisk, by stealing life from living people. Asterisk, by sharing, we share our cold, they share their warmth. It's fair. Asterisk. The other lights began moving closer. The temperature dropped so fast that frost started forming on the trees around us. My breath came out in thick white clouds. Julie, I said quietly, when I give the signal, run for Tommy. Get him to the creek. What about you? I'll hold them off. With what? You said it yourself. We don't have any weapons that can hurt them. She was right. But maybe I didn't need to hurt them. Maybe I just needed to understand them. I thought about the message carved in the cellar wall, about the bones arranged in patterns, about children who died in some kind of epidemic in 1934. What happened to you? I asked the lights. How did you die? Amanda's light drifted closer. The cold was so intense now that my skin burned. Asterisk. The sickness came in winter. Fever that wouldn't break. We got so cold, so hungry. Mama and Papa tried to help, but there wasn't enough food, enough warmth. One by one, we froze. Asterisk. And then? Asterisk. Then we woke up, but we were still cold, still hungry. And the living people had so much warmth, it seemed wrong not to share. Asterisk, I understood now. They weren't evil. They were children who'd died of hunger and cold, who'd somehow become trapped between life and death. They didn't understand that what they were doing was murder. Tommy's just a boy, I said. Like you were. Would you want someone to do this to you when you were alive? The lights hesitated. For a moment, the cold lessened. Asterisk, but we're so hungry. Asterisk, I know. But taking his life won't make you alive again. It'll just make you like us, dead. Asterisk, dead? Asterisk, this voice came from a different light. A boy maybe 10 years old. Asterisk, are we really dead? Asterisk, yes. I said gently, you died a long time ago. Your bodies are buried in the settlement. We found your bones. The lights began to pulse erratically, like they were arguing among themselves. The circle around Tommy wavered. Now, I whispered to Julie. She sprinted toward Tommy's hiding place. 3 of the lights moved to intercept her, but they seemed confused, uncertain. Julie grabbed the boy and kept running toward the creek. The remaining lights turned toward me, and their confusion turned to anger. The cold hit me like a physical blow, so intense that my flashlight went out and my radio sparked and died. Asterisk. You're trying to trick us. Asterisk, Amanda said. Asterisk. You want to keep all the warmth for yourself. Asterisk. No, I said, backing toward the creek. I'm trying to help you. You don't have to be hungry anymore. You can rest. Asterisk. Rest is cold. Rest is empty. We want to be warm. Asterisk. They rushed toward me all at once. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, my breath burning in my lungs. Behind me, I could feel the terrible cold gaining ground. I reached the creek just as the lights caught up. The cold hit me so hard that I fell to my knees in the shallow water. Ice began forming around my legs, but the lights stopped at the water's edge. They couldn't cross. Julie and Tommy were on the other side, both of them shaking with cold but alive. It's over, I gasped. They can't reach us here. But I was wrong. As I watched, the lights began to change. They grew brighter, more solid, and I realized what they were doing. They were using the last of their energy to become physical, solid enough to cross the water. Amanda's light touched the creek. Steam rose where the green fire met the running water, but she didn't stop. Step by step, she began walking across the stream bed. The other lights followed. I don't remember much about what happened next. Julie told me later that I started throwing rocks, ordinary creek stones. Nothing special about them, except they were all I had. But somehow, it worked. When the stones hit the lights, they shattered like glass, releasing brief screams that sounded like wind through broken windows. Maybe it was the iron and the rocks. Maybe it was just that they'd used up all their energy trying to cross the water. Or maybe, after 50 years of hunger and loneliness, some part of them wanted to let go. One by one, the lights went out. Amanda was the last to go. For just a moment, before her light faded completely, she looked like a normal 8-year-old girl again, tired, sad, but finally at peace. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she was gone. We carried Tommy Henderson out of the valley that night. It took 6 hours of hiking in the dark, but we made it back to the trailhead just as the sun was coming up. The boy didn't say much during the hike, just held Julie's hand and kept looking back over his shoulder like he expected to see green lights following us. The official report listed the Henderson family deaths as a hiking accident. Exposure, we said. Hypothermia brought on by an unexpected cold snap. Tommy was the only survivor, found in shock but otherwise unharmed. Nobody questioned it. Nobody wanted to dig deeper into what had really happened in that valley. The area was quietly designated as a wilderness preserve, day, off-limits to camping, to official access by permit only. I transferred to day operations after that. Couldn't handle the night shifts anymore. Every time darkness fell, I found myself listening for children's voices on the radio, watching for lights that moved too smoothly through the trees. Julie left the Park Service entirely. Moved to Florida, got a job with the Coast Guard. She said she needed to be around open water and bright sunshine for a while. Tommy Henderson went to live with relatives in California. I heard he grew up to be a doctor, like his father. Never got married, never had kids. Some experiences change you in ways that never fully heal. As for me, I served out my time with the Park Service and retired in 1995. I still live near the mountains, but I've never gone back to the Cataract Falls area. Some places are meant to be left alone, but sometimes, on clear winter nights, airline pilots report seeing strange lights in that valley. Green lights that move in patterns too organized to be natural phenomena. The FAA has issued warnings about possible equipment malfunctions in the area. I know better. Those children found peace that night in 1982, but the hunger they'd awakened, that's still there, waiting in the old settlement ruins, looking for new sources of warmth in the cold mountain darkness. The official reports all mention equipment failures, but I know the truth. Some hungers never die. They just sleep until the next group of hikers decides to camp in a restricted area, until the next family ventures too deep into the woods after dark. The lights are still out there, and they're still hungry. That's why I'm telling you this story, not because I expect you to believe it, but because maybe someday you'll be hiking in the mountains and you'll see strange lights moving through the trees. When that happens, remember what I've told you. Don't follow the lights. Don't listen to their voices. And whatever you do, don't let them touch you. Find running water and stay there until dawn. Trust me on this. After 37 years, it's the one piece of advice I can give you that might save your life. The mountains are beautiful during the day, but at night, in certain valleys where the old communities used to be, they belong to something else entirely. Something that remembers what it was like to be human, but has forgotten how to be anything except hungry. My name is Samuel Ridge, and I've been a ranger in Daniel Boone National Forest for 22 years. I know these Kentucky hills like the back of my weathered hands. Every deer trail, every limestone cave, every bend in the Red River. Born and raised in a holler that's now part of the park, I watched civilization creep into the wilderness, one survey stake at a time. People think being a ranger is all campfire talks and lost hikers. Truth is, most of my job involves predator control. When farmers on the forest border lose livestock, they call me. When someone spots what they think is a cougar or bear acting strange, I'm the one who tracks it down. 22 years, and I've seen just about everything these mountains can throw at you. Or so I thought. It was March 1989 when everything changed. Late winter thaw had the creeks running high, and fog settling thick in the valleys. I was driving my pickup down a gravel road toward the Hoskins farm when my radio crackled to life. "Sam, you there?" Betty's voice came through the static. She'd been dispatching for the Forest Service longer than I'd been ranging. "Go ahead, Betty. Got another livestock call. Third one this week. Lenny Hoskins says something got his horses." I pulled over and grabbed my notepad. "Same as the others?" "Sounds like it. But Sam." Her voice dropped. "Lenny's pretty shook up. Says this wasn't no bear or wildcat." The other calls had been strange enough. 2 farms, both on the forest border. Both reporting horses killed in ways that didn't make sense. No claw marks, no bite wounds on the throat like you'd expect from a big cat. Just surgical cuts. Clean, precise, like someone had used a scalpel. "Tell Lenny I'll be there in 10 minutes, I said. The Hoskins place sat in a clearing where the forest met pasture land. Lenny was waiting by his barn, a tall man with calloused hands and worry lines deeper than his 50 years should have carved. His 2 horses lay in the field behind him. "Morning, Lenny." I grabbed my camera and investigation kit from the truck. "Show me what happened." "I ain't never seen nothing like it, Sam." His voice shook. "Found them this morning, just after dawn." We walked to where the horses lay. My stomach turned. Someone, or something, had removed their spines with surgical precision. The bones were gone, but the cuts were so clean the animals looked almost peaceful, like they'd just laid down to sleep. "Any sounds last night?" I asked, taking photos. "That's the thing." Lenny wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "Around midnight I heard this whistling. Thought it was wind through the trees at first, but what? It was coming from 3 directions at once, like whatever was making it could be in multiple places." I'd grown up hearing old Cherokee stories from my grandmother about things that lived in these mountains. Spirits that could split themselves, creatures that hunted in the space between worlds. Folklore, I'd always thought, mountain superstition. "You see anything unusual in the woods lately?" I asked. "Tracks, broken branches, anything disturbed?" "Now that you mention it." Lenny pointed toward the tree line. "There's been some strange prints near the creek, too big for a dog, wrong shape for a bear." We walked to the edge of his property, where it butted against the forest. Sure enough, in the soft mud by the creek bank, I found tracks unlike anything in my field guides. Bipedal, about 14 inches long, with what looked like claw marks at the tips. But the stride length was wrong, 7 feet between prints. Whatever made these tracks was either jumping or moving faster than should be possible. I made plaster casts and took measurements. The tracks led straight into the forest, toward the deep gorge country where the Red River carved through limestone cliffs. That was rough territory. Caves, overhangs, rhododendron thickets so thick you needed a machete to get through. "Lenny, I want you to keep your remaining stock close to the barn for a few days," I said. "And if you hear that whistling again, you call me immediately." Back at the ranger station, I spread my photos and notes across my desk. 3 farms, 6 horses, all killed the same impossible way. The state wildlife biologist was stumped. The veterinarian who'd examined the first victims had no explanation for the surgical precision of the cuts. "Looks like a scalpel job," Doc Morrison had said, but no human could restrain a horse long enough to do this kind of work. I pulled out topographical maps of the area where the tracks led. The Red River Gorge stretched for miles, a maze of cliffs and caves that even experienced cavers avoided. The Cherokee had considered it sacred hunting ground. Daniel Boone himself had written about unnatural sounds echoing from those cliffs. My radio buzzed. "Sam, you better get that back out to the Hoskins place." Lenny called in pretty upset. 20 minutes later, I was back in Lenny's field, staring at something that made my mouth go dry. The horse bodies had been moved, arranged in a perfect circle, heads pointing inward. In the center of the circle, someone had stacked their spine bones into a pyramid. "They were just laying there when I left this morning," Lenny whispered. "I swear to God, Sam, they were just laying there normal." I walked around the circle, looking for human footprints, tire tracks, any sign of how this had been done. Nothing. Just those same impossible bipedal tracks, circling the horses like a predator marking territory. The whistling started as the sun went down. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere, a haunting melody that seemed to bounce off the limestone cliffs and echo through the valleys. 3 distinct pitches harmonizing with each other, but I could see no source. Lenny and I stood in his field, scanning the tree line with flashlights that suddenly felt inadequate. "There," Lenny pointed toward the gorge. "You hear how it's coming from different places?" I did hear it. The whistling moved, flowing from north to south to east, like whatever was making it could teleport between locations. Or like there were 3 of them coordinating. "Get inside, Lenny, lock your doors, and don't come out until sunrise." "What about you?" I checked my sidearm and grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight from the truck. "I'm going to see what's out there." The tracks led into the forest along an old deer trail that wound toward the gorge. I'd walked this path 100 times in daylight, but tonight everything felt different. Wrong. The normal night sounds, owls, insects, small animals rustling through leaves, had gone silent. Even my footsteps seemed muffled, like the forest was holding its breath. My radio crackled with static, then died completely. Same with my watch. The digital display flickered and went dark. Something about this place was interfering with electronics. A mile into the woods, I found the first marker. Animal bones hung from tree branches in precise patterns. Deer ribs, bear skulls, what looked like the complete skeleton of a large bird, all arranged with mathematical precision. The bones were old but clean, picked completely free of meat and tissue. They swayed slightly in the still air, clicking against each other like wind chimes. The whistling had stopped, but I felt watched, evaluated. I took photos with my old 35mm camera. At least it didn't need batteries. The flash illuminated the bone arrangements in stark detail, and in one photo, I caught something else. A shape moving between trees about 50 yards away. Tall, angular, disappearing the moment the flash faded. Forest Service. I called out. "I'm investigating livestock killings. If someone's out there, I need to speak with you." No answer except the echo of my own voice bouncing off cliff faces. The trail split ahead, one path continuing toward the gorge, another climbing toward the ridge. The tracks I was following went straight toward the cliffs, but something made me hesitate. A feeling, maybe, like walking into a trap. I chose the ridge path. Good thing I did. 10 minutes later, I heard screaming from the direction of the gorge trail. Human screaming. Terrified, desperate, cut short. I ran toward the sound, crashing through rhododendron thickets and stumbling over fallen logs. My flashlight beam bounced wildly as I pushed through the undergrowth. The screaming came again, closer this time, and I recognized the voice. Marcus Webb, a hiker from Louisville who'd been reported missing 3 days ago. I found him in a small clearing, where the creek bent around a stand of ancient hemlocks. He was alive but pinned against a tree by something I couldn't see clearly in the darkness. His legs kicked frantically about, 6 feet off the ground. "Help me," Marcus screamed. "It's got my back. It's cutting into my back." I drew my pistol and advanced flashlight beam searching for his attacker. What I saw made no sense. Marcus appeared to be held up by invisible hands, his shirt torn away, blood running down his spine, but I couldn't see what was holding him. "Marcus, I'm here. Try to stay calm." His screaming stopped abruptly. His legs went limp. Something dropped him to the ground like a discarded doll. I rushed to where he fell and immediately wished I hadn't. Marcus was still alive, still conscious, but his spine was gone, removed with the same surgical precision I'd seen on the horses. He stared at me with shocked, glassy eyes. "Can't feel my legs?" he whispered. "Can't feel anything below my neck. Hang on, Marcus. I'm calling for help." But my radio was still dead, and we were miles from the nearest road. Marcus Webb died while I held his hand, whispering apologies I knew. Couldn't help him. That's when I heard the whistling again. Right behind me, I spun around, pistol raised, and saw my first clear look at what was hunting in these woods. It stood 9 feet tall on legs that bent wrong at the knees. Its body was lean and muscular, covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb my flashlight beam. The head was wolf-like but larger, with ears that twitched toward every sound. But it was the hands that stopped my breath. Human-like, with long fingers that ended in surgical sharp claws. And it was holding Marcus Webb's spine like a trophy. We stared at each other for maybe 5 seconds. The creature's eyes reflected my flashlight beam with an intelligence that was definitely not animal. It tilted its head, studying me the way a scientist might examine an interesting specimen. Then it smiled. Actually smiled, showing teeth designed for tearing meat. I shot at center mass. The bullet hit. I saw the impact, but the creature just stepped backward and laughed. A sound like breaking glass mixed with wind through a graveyard. "Bad choice," it said in a voice like grinding bones. It could talk. I ran. The creature followed, crashing through the forest behind me with impossible speed. I could hear it gaining ground, hear its claws scraping bark as it bounded from tree to tree. My flashlight died, plunging me into complete darkness. I ran blind through the forest, guided only by muscle memory and 22 years of walking these trails. Branches whipped my face, roots caught my feet, but I didn't dare slow down. The thing behind me was playing with me, I realized. It could have caught me easily, but was staying just close enough to keep me terrified. Then the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I tumbled down an embankment I'd forgotten existed, rolling through dead leaves and thorns until I splashed into the creek at the bottom. The cold water shocked me back to full awareness. I was in a narrow ravine with cliff walls on both sides, a dead end. Above me, perched on the edge of the cliff like a gargoyle, the creature looked down. It raised Marcus Webb's spine above its head and whistled that haunting 3-part harmony. Other voices answered from different directions. There were more of them. I spent that night huddled in a limestone overhang, shivering in wet clothes and listening to the whistling conversation echoing through the gorge. The creatures, I counted at least 3 distinct voices, seemed to be coordinating, planning something. When dawn finally came, the sound stopped. I climbed out of the ravine and made my way back to Marcus Webb's body, following my own trail of broken branches and scattered equipment. What I found there made me question my sanity. Marcus was gone. Not just his body, every trace of him. No blood on the ground, no torn clothing, nothing to indicate he'd ever existed. Even my footprints from the night before had been erased, the forest floor smoothed like someone had raked it clean. If not for the photos in my camera, I might have convinced myself it was all a nightmare brought on by stress and isolation. Back at the ranger station, I developed the film in our darkroom. Most of the shots were blurred or too dark to make out details, but 3 images came through clear. The bone arrangements hanging from trees, the impossible bipedal tracks in the mud, and in the background of one photo, barely visible, a tall shape watching from the shadows. I spread the photos on my desk and called my supervisor. "Jim, I need backup out here. We've got a situation that's beyond predator control." "What kind of situation?" I looked at the photos again. "How do you explain something that sounds insane? We've got an organized group killing livestock and potentially attacking hikers. They're using the cave system in the gorge as a base." "Organized group? Like a cult? Something like..." "Why?" It wasn't exactly a lie. "I need at least 2 more rangers and permission to seal off the area." "Sam, you've been working too many double shifts. Why don't you take a few days off? Let someone else handle the livestock calls." "Jim, I found a missing hiker last night, Marcus Webb from Louisville. He was tortured and killed by something that knows surgical anatomy. You found a body? Where is it? That's complicated. Sam, either you found a body or you didn't. If there's been a murder, we need to call the state police immediately. I hung up and stared at the photos. How do you report creatures that can speak, move faster than bullets, and erase evidence of their crimes? How do you convince anyone that something impossible is hunting in these mountains? My radio buzzed. Sam, you there? Got another livestock call. This time it was the Peterson Ranch, 5 miles east of the Hoskins place. I drove out expecting to find more surgically killed and horses, but what I discovered was worse. Janet Powell, a local veterinarian who'd been treating the injured animals from the previous attacks, hung from an oak tree like a scarecrow. Her arms were spread wide, supported by branches that had been precisely bent and woven to hold her weight. She was still alive when I found her, but barely conscious. Janet, I climbed the tree, trying to figure out how to get her down without causing more damage. What happened? Who did this to you? Her eyes focused on me with effort. Not who, she whispered. What? It was waiting in my barn, knew I'd been examining the horses. She coughed, specks of blood on her lips. It wanted to know what I'd learned. What did you tell it? The truth. That the cuts were impossible. That nothing in nature could make them. Her voice grew weaker. It laughed when I said that. Said humans think they understand what's natural. Janet, I'm going to get you down from here. Don't try to talk. No. Her grip on my arm was surprisingly strong. It's still here, watching. It let me live long enough to give you a message. What message? Stay away from Bone Hollow. That's what it called the caves. Said the hollow has been feeding for centuries, and it won't stop for one curious ranger. Her eyes rolled back. It's in the tree with us, Sam, right now. I looked up through the branches and saw yellow eyes staring down at me. The creature clung to the trunk about 20 feet above us, its claws dug deep into the bark. This close, I could see details that made my skin crawl. Its fur was matted with old blood. Its elongated fingers ended in surgical sharp talons, and hanging from its neck like a necklace were human vertebrae. It spoke in that grinding bone voice. The woman is correct, Samuel Ridge. You should stay away from our hollow. Let her go. Take me instead. The creature laughed. We don't want you, Ranger. Not yet. First, you must understand what you're fighting. It released its grip on the tree and dropped to the ground beside us with fluid grace. Your kind thinks you own these mountains. But you're just temporary visitors. We were here before your Cherokee, before your Daniel Boone, before your ancestors learned to walk upright. Janet Powell died while it spoke, her hand going limp in mine. Why are you killing them? I demanded. We harvest what we need. Spinal fluid for strength, bone marrow for healing, vertebrae for our collection. The creature gestured toward Janet's body. This one learned too much about our feeding methods. She had to be silenced. What collection? Come to Bone Hollow and see for yourself. Yellow eyes gleamed with predatory intelligence. But come alone, Samuel Ridge. Bring others, and we'll hunt them down one by one, just like we hunted your backup ranger. What backup ranger? The creature smiled with too many teeth. Tommy Morrison was his name. Young man, barely. Started his career. Found him yesterday following your tracks into the gorge. It reached into its matted fur and pulled out a badge. Tommy's badge. He lasted longer than the others. Begged very creatively. I drew my pistol, but the creature was already moving. It flowed up the tree trunk like liquid shadow, disappearing into the canopy before I could aim. Its laughter echoed from multiple directions as it bounded from tree to tree, growing fainter until only silence remained. I climbed down from the oak and called for an ambulance, even though Janet was beyond help. When the EMTs arrived, I told them she'd been attacked by an unknown assailant who fled into the forest. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was all they'd believe. That evening, I drove to the Morrison place to confirm my worst fears. Tommy's mother met me at the door, her eyes red from crying. He never came home from his shift yesterday, she said. His supervisor says he was following up on your livestock. Investigation. Sam, what happened to my boy? I stood on her porch, holding the badge the creature had shown me, and lied to a grieving mother. I don't know, Mrs. Morrison, but I'm going to find out. Back at the ranger station, I loaded every weapon I could legally carry. Pistol, rifle, shotgun, emergency flares. I studied topographical maps of the gorge system, looking for caves marked as Bone Hollow or any similar name. Nothing. But I remembered stories my grandmother used to tell about a place the Cherokee called the Singing Cliffs. Caves where spirits gathered to harvest strength from the living world. According to legend, warriors who ventured there either returned, changed forever, or never returned at all. Time to find out which kind of warrior I was. I entered the gorge at dawn, following the clearest set of tracks I'd found. The creatures weren't hiding their trail anymore. They wanted me to find them. The path led deeper into the cliff system than I'd ever ventured, through passages barely wide enough for a human, over rock formations that required climbing gear I didn't have. The first bones appeared after an hour of hiking, human skulls arranged in niches carved into the limestone walls. Some looked ancient, others recent. I recognized Tommy Morrison's face among them and had to stop to control my rage. The whistling started again, but this time it wasn't moving. It came from one location ahead, a cave opening hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines. The sound echoed from deep underground, three-part harmony that seemed to vibrate through the rock itself. I pushed through the vines and entered Bone Hollow. The cave system opened into a vast underground chamber, lit by some kind of phosphorescent moss. The walls were covered with human vertebrae, thousands of them, arranged in intricate patterns that hurt my eyes to look at directly. In the center of the chamber, three creatures sat around a pile of fresh spinal columns, passing them back and forth like communion wine. They looked up when I entered, yellow eyes reflecting the dim light. "Samuel Ridge arrives at last," said the largest one. "Welcome to our cathedral." I raised my rifle. "Let me guess. You're the ones who've been harvesting my people." "Your people?" The creature stood, revealing its full 10-foot height. "This land was ours when your ancestors were cowering from mammoths. We fed on the Cherokee, the settlers, the loggers. Now we feed on rangers and hikers and veterinarians. The menu changes, but the hunger remains constant. What are you? We are what your people call Wendigo, though that name comes from tribes far to the north. The Cherokee knew us by other names: bone singers, marrow drinkers, spine collectors. We are hunger given form, need made flesh." I noticed other passages leading out of the main chamber. "How many of you are there? In this hollow?" "3. In these mountains?" "Dozens." "In the world?" The creature gestured at the walls covered in human vertebrae. "We are Legion, Ranger. We are the price your species pays for believing you conquered the wilderness." "Why the spines? Why not just kill and eat like normal predators?" The largest creature picked up a fresh vertebra and bit into it like an apple. "Spinal fluid contains the essence of what makes your kind unique. Your ability to walk upright, to think in abstractions, to believe you're more than animals. When we consume it, we gain your strengths while keeping our own." "And the bone collections?" "Trophies. Proof of our superiority. Each spine represents a life we ended, a small victory in our eternal war against human expansion." It gestured at the walls. "Some of these are over 1,000 years old. We've been harvesting here since before your Christ was born." I counted 3 passages leading out of the chamber and tried to memorize the layout. If I was going to survive this, I'd need to understand their territory. "You killed Tommy Morrison. He was just a kid. He was a threat. Young rangers are the most dangerous. They have energy and idealism. Better to harvest them before they become experienced enough to hurt us." "And Janet Powell? She was learning too much about our feeding methods. Given time, she might have found ways to track us, to predict our movements. We couldn't allow that." The second creature, smaller but more scarred than the others, stood and walked toward me. "You're wondering if you can kill us, aren't you, Samuel Ridge? You're calculating angles, estimating distances, planning your attack." I kept my rifle trained on the largest creature but tracked the second one with my peripheral vision. The thought had crossed my mind. "We are not easy to kill. Our bones are denser than yours, our muscles stronger, our reflexes faster. But most importantly..." The scarred creature moved with blurring speed, appearing beside me, before I could turn. "We heal from wounds that would cripple your kind." It grabbed my rifle barrel and bent it into a useless curve. I drew my pistol, but the third creature was already behind me, its claws at my throat. "However," said the largest creature, "we are not immortal. The Cherokee learned to fight us using fire, cliff falls, and winter starvation. Some of their warriors even learned to think like us, to hunt us as we hunt you. Why are you telling me this? Because you remind us of those warriors. You came here alone, knowing you would probably die, because that was the only way to protect your people. We respect that." The creature tilted its head. "So we offer you a choice." "What choice?" "Join us. Become what we are. We can teach you to move through shadows, to harvest the essence of life, to live beyond human limitations. You would never grow old, never grow weak, never die of disease or accident." I looked at the walls covered in human vertebrae, and all I'd have to do is help you kill people. You would help us maintain the balance. Humans breed too fast, spread too far, consume too much. We are nature's way of keeping your species in check. That's insane. Is it? Look at what your kind has done to these mountains in just 2 centuries. Strip mining, clear cutting, pollution, development. We kill perhaps a dozen humans per year. Your species kills entire ecosystems. The creature behind me pressed its claws against my throat just hard enough to draw blood. "Choose quickly, Samuel Ridge. Join us willingly, or become just another spine on our wall." I closed my eyes and thought about Tommy Morrison's young face, about Janet Powell dying in that tree, about Marcus Webb whispering that he couldn't feel his legs. Then I thought about the emergency flares in my backpack. "I choose option 3, I said, and triggered the first flare. The phosphorescent moss throughout the cave ignited like gasoline, filling the chamber with blinding light and choking smoke. The creatures shrieked in pain and confusion, their enhanced night vision making them vulnerable to the sudden brightness. I rolled away from the one behind me and triggered the second flare, then the third. The cave became a furnace of burning moss and chemical flames. The Wendigos crashed into walls and each other, temporarily blinded. I ran for the nearest passage, following it deeper into the cave system. Behind me, the creatures roared with rage and pain, but they were recovering faster than I'd hoped. I could hear them pursuing, their claws scraping stone as they bounded through the tunnels. The passage opened onto a narrow ledge overlooking a chasm I couldn't see the bottom of. Across the gap, maybe 10 feet away, another ledge led to what looked like an exit. The creatures were designed for speed and strength, but their size would work against them here. I jumped. I made it across the chasm by inches, landing hard on the far ledge and scrambling for handholds in the limestone. Behind me, the creatures reached the edge of their ledge but couldn't follow. Their weight and size made the jump impossible. "This isn't over, Samuel Ridge." The largest one roared across the gap. "We know where you live, where you work, where you sleep. You cannot protect everyone." "Maybe not," I called back. "But I can make it expensive for you to try." I followed the passage until it emerged onto the cliff face high above the Red River. From there, it was a 3-hour hike back to my truck, but I'd escaped Bone Hollow alive. The next week was a bureaucratic nightmare. I filed reports about gas leak explosions in the cave system, recommended closing the entire gorge area due to geological instability, and transferred every bit of evidence I'd gathered to the State Wildlife Agency. The official story became that a pack of unusually large coyotes had been killing livestock, but the pack had moved on after their den was destroyed in a natural cave-in. No one questioned it too closely. People prefer explanations that let them sleep at night. 3 months later, I put in for early retirement. 22 years was enough. I moved to Florida, bought a small house near the coast, and tried to forget about the things that whistled in the mountains. But forgetting isn't that easy. I still wake up some nights, hearing that 3-part harmony echoing through my dreams. I check news reports from Kentucky religiously, looking for patterns of unexplained deaths or missing hikers. Sometimes I find them, clusters of disappearances in remote areas, bodies found with impossible injuries, witnesses reporting strange sounds in the forest. The Wendigos are still out there, still hunting, still harvesting. And I'm not the only one who knows about them. Last month, I got a call from a young park ranger in Colorado. She'd found my name in some old case files and wanted to ask about unusual predator behavior. Her description of surgical bone removal and triangulating whistles was exact enough to make my hands shake. "Sir, I think these things can think," she told me. "I think they're planning something." I gave her what advice I could. Stay out of cave systems. Never hunt them alone. Fire is more effective than bullets. And most importantly, don't try to understand them. The moment you start thinking like them is the moment they win. But I didn't tell her the whole truth. I didn't mention the walls covered in human vertebrae, or the creatures' claim that there were dozens of them throughout the mountains, or their offer to let me join them. Some knowledge is too dangerous to share. I keep my emergency bag packed and my firearms cleaned, just in case. Because deep down, I know that someday they'll come for me. The Wendigos don't forget, and they don't forgive. I humiliated them, destroyed their cathedral, cost them 1,000 years of collected trophies. They'll want revenge. When they come, I'll be ready. Not because I think I can win. I've seen what they're capable of. But because every day I delay them is another day that families like the Morrisons don't have to bury their children. Another day that young veterinarians don't hang from trees like scarecrows. It's not much of a victory, but it's the only one available. Sometimes, late at night when the ocean wind sounds almost like whistling through limestone cliffs, I wonder if I made the right choice in that cave. The Wendigos offered me immortality, strength beyond human limits, freedom from the weaknesses of flesh and age. All I had to do was help them harvest people like cattle. Maybe some prices are too high to pay, even for eternal life. But then I think about Tommy Morrison's badge, about Janet Powell's whispered warning, about Marcus Webb's paralyzed terror, and I know I chose correctly. Better to be human for 70 years than to be a monster for eternity. Even if the monsters are winning, the Red River Gorge remains closed to the public, officially due to unstable rock formations. Unofficially, the occasional hiker still disappears in the surrounding wilderness. The news reports always blame natural accidents, falls, exposure, animal attacks. But I know better. The Wendigos are still out there in Bone Hollow, rebuilding their collection one spine at a time. And someday soon, they'll come looking for the ranger who got away. I'll be waiting. My name is Robert McLeod, and I've been a park ranger for 17 years. I've seen bears attack campers, pulled bodies from waterfalls, and rescued dozens of lost hikers from the Georgia mountains. Nothing in those years prepared me for what happened at Blood Mountain in April of 1985. People always ask me why I transferred to Arizona. They want to know why I left the green mountains of Georgia for the desert. I tell them I needed a change of scenery. That's not the whole truth. The real truth is that some places hold on to things they shouldn't. Some places remember pain so deep it never heals. Blood Mountain got its name from the Cherokee. They called it the place of blood long before white settlers came. Local stories say it was a battle site, but that's not quite right. What happened there was worse than any battle. I was 41 that spring, divorced for 3 years, with 2 kids I saw every other weekend. My ex-wife said I cared more about the mountains than my family. Maybe she was right. The mountains made sense to me. They had rules. They were honest about their dangers. The weather station sat at 4,000 feet, right at the tree line. Harold Jenkins had been running it for 8 years. Harold was the kind of guy who talked to his equipment like it was alive. He'd been a weatherman on TV before he got tired of being wrong about rain and moved to the mountains. Harold never missed his daily radio check. Every morning at 8 a.m. sharp, his voice would crackle through the static. Blood Mountain Station, all systems normal. Every evening at 6 p.m., Blood Mountain Station, signing off for the night. On April 15th, Harold didn't call. I wasn't worried at first. Radio equipment breaks, storms knock down antennas. Mountain life is full of small emergencies. But when Harold missed the second day, then the third, I knew something was wrong. The automated weather readings were still coming through, but they didn't make sense. The temperature gauge showed numbers that jumped from 65 degrees to 32 degrees and back again, sometimes within minutes. The barometric pressure readings looked like someone was shaking the instruments. My supervisor, Jim Patterson, studied the printouts with a frown. "Equipment's probably fried," he said. "Take Maria up there and bring Harold down. We'll get the whole system replaced." Maria Santos had been my partner for 2 years. She was smart, tough, and didn't scare easily. She'd grown up in these mountains, knew every trail and every story the old-timers told around campfires. We started the hike at dawn on April 18th. The weather was perfect. Clear sky, temperature in the 60s, no wind. Spring in the Georgia mountains can be the most beautiful thing in the world. The trail to Blood Mountain is steep but well marked. We'd both climbed it dozens of times. For the first hour, everything felt normal. Birds sang in the trees. Squirrels chattered at us from the branches. A deer watched us pass, then bounded away through the forest. At 3,000 feet, something changed. The air got thick. Not humid. Thick, like breathing through cotton. Maria stopped first, pulling out her water bottle. "You feel that?" she asked. I did feel it. The air pressure had shifted, like right before a bad storm. But the sky was still clear. No clouds anywhere. "Barometric change," I said. "Weather's moving in." But I kept looking at the sky. There should have been clouds. There should have been wind. Instead, there was just that thick, heavy air and a silence that felt wrong. At 3,500 feet, we hit the mist. It came out of nowhere, rolling up from the valley like a gray wall. One minute we could see for miles, the next minute we couldn't see 20 feet ahead. "That's not normal," Maria said. She was right. Mist usually forms in low places first, then climbs. This mist had appeared at altitude, moving against the natural flow of air. It moved too fast and in the wrong direction. "Harold might be stuck up there," I said. "Can't see his hand in front of his face in this stuff." We kept climbing, but every step felt heavier. The mist wasn't just around us, it was in us, making our lungs work harder for each breath. Our voices sounded muffled, like we were underwater. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in 10 minutes. The weather station sat on a flat, rocky area just above the tree line. Through the mist, it looked like a ghost building, gray and fuzzy around the edges. The wind gauge spun wildly even though I couldn't feel any breeze. The temperature display flashed between readings so fast I couldn't follow the numbers. "Harold," I called out. "Harold, you up here?" Nothing answered except the echo of my own voice, strange and hollow in the thick air. The station door was unlocked. Inside, everything looked normal. Harold's coffee mug sat on the desk, still half full. His logbook lay open too. April 15th. The last entry, written in Harold's careful handwriting, said, 6 p.m. Temperature dropping fast. Something wrong with instruments. Children playing outside. Maria read over my shoulder. "Children? What children?" I looked out the window, but the mist was so thick I could barely see the weather instruments 10 feet away. "Harold doesn't have kids. No kids live up here." The radio equipment worked fine. I tried calling base camp, got Jim Patterson on the first try. "Found the station," I reported. "Harold's not here. Equipment's going crazy, but his log says kids were playing outside yesterday." Static filled the radio for a long moment. Then Jim's voice came back. "No, kids reported missing. Check around the area. Harold might have fallen. Hurt himself." Outside, the mist had gotten thicker. I could barely see Maria when she was 5 feet away. We tied a rope between us so we wouldn't get separated. "Look at this," Maria called out. She was kneeling by a patch of snow that shouldn't have existed. It was April. Temperatures had been in the 60s all week, but here was fresh snow in a perfect circle about 6 feet across. In the snow were footprints. Small footprints, children's footprints, but these weren't normal footprints. They were too light, barely pressed into the snow. And they were cold, not just winter cold, but something deeper. When I touched one with my finger, the cold went right through my glove, up my arm, straight to my bones. 7 of them. Maria counted, different sizes. Youngest looks maybe 5 years old. The footprints led away from the weather station, toward the edge of the rocky area where the ground dropped off into nothing. We followed them carefully, step by step. They stopped at the cliff edge. Just stopped, like 7 children had walked to the edge and stepped off into empty air. "Maybe they went around," Maria suggested, but she didn't sound like she believed it. I looked down into the mist-filled valley. Couldn't see bottom. Couldn't see anything except gray fog that moved like it was alive. "Harold!" I shouted into the valley. "Harold Jenkins!" Something answered, not Harold's voice. A child's voice, thin and far away. "So cold. So cold." Maria grabbed my arm. Did you hear that? I heard it. We both heard it. A child crying somewhere down in the mist, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Help us, came another voice. Please help us. My training kicked in. Children in trouble, regardless of how they got there. I got the climbing rope from my pack. We're coming down, I called. Stay where you are. I tied the rope to the strongest pine tree I could find and started down the cliff face. The mist got thicker as I descended. Within 20 feet, I couldn't see the top anymore. Maria's voice calling my name sounded like it was coming from another world. 30 feet down, I found Harold. He was lying on a narrow ledge, arms and legs sprawled like he'd fallen and never moved again. No visible injuries. No blood, but Harold Jenkins, who had been 45 years old 3 days ago, looked like an 80-year-old man. His hair had gone completely white. His face was covered in deep wrinkles. His skin looked like old paper, thin and fragile. When I touched his wrist to check for a pulse, his skin was ice cold. Harold Jenkins had died of old age in 3 days. I radioed Maria. Found him. He's dead. You need to see this. The voices stopped. She radioed back. Whatever those kids were, they're gone now. But she was wrong. They weren't gone. As I waited for Maria to rappel down, I heard them again. Closer this time. Moving through the mist like whispers. So cold, help us get warm. Getting Harold's body up the cliff took 3 hours. In that time, the mist never lifted. If anything, it got thicker. The temperature kept dropping, even though my watch said it was only 2 p.m. and should have been the warmest part of the day. Maria was quiet as we worked. She'd taken one look at Harold's aged face and hadn't said a word since. When we finally got him to the top, she sat down hard on a rock and stared at nothing. This doesn't happen, she said finally. People don't age 40 years in 3 days. I didn't have an answer for that. In 17 years of mountain rescue, I'd seen heart attacks, hypothermia, bear maulings, falls that broke every bone in a body. I'd never seen anything like Harold Jenkins. We need to get out of here, I said. Get back to base camp, call in the medical examiner. But when we looked for the trail, we couldn't find it. The mist had changed everything. Landmarks that should have been obvious. The big boulder shaped like a bear. The twisted oak tree. The stream crossing. They were all gone. Or maybe they were still there, hidden in the gray fog that seemed to swallow everything more than a few feet away. Trails this way, Maria said, pointing into the mist. No, that's north. Trail heads south. But my compass needle spun lazily in circles, unable to find magnetic north. The GPS unit I carried showed nothing but static on its screen. We were lost on a mountain we'd climbed dozens of times. Okay, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. We stay put until the mist clears. Set up the emergency shelter, wait it out. But the mist didn't clear. As the afternoon wore on, it got darker, thicker, colder. The temperature on my thermometer read 28 degrees, but that was impossible. The Weather Service had predicted highs in the 70s. As we set up the small emergency tent, I heard them again. The children's voices drifting through the mist. Cold. So cold. Need to get warm. Where are you? I called out. We can help you. Here, came a voice from my left. Here, came another from my right. Here. 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 The voices surrounded us, coming from every direction. Maria was shaking, but not from cold. Robert, those aren't real children. What do you mean? Listen to them. Really listen. I stopped what I was doing and focused on the voices. She was right. They didn't sound quite right. The words were clear, but underneath them was something else. An echo that didn't match. A hollow sound. Like voices coming from the bottom of a well. So cold, been cold so long, help us get warm. Through the mist, shapes started to appear. Small shapes, moving toward us. At first, I thought it was just the fog playing tricks with my eyes. But the shapes got clearer, more solid. Children. 7 children, walking out of the mist. They were dressed in old clothes, simple dresses for the girls, rough pants and shirts for the boys. No shoes on any of them. Their hair was long and dark, their skin pale as milk. The oldest looked maybe 10 years old. The youngest couldn't have been more than 5, and they were beautiful. Sad and beautiful and so cold-looking that my heart broke just seeing them. Oh no, Maria whispered. Oh no, those poor babies. The children walked toward us with their arms outstretched, like they wanted hugs. Like they wanted warmth. It's okay, I called to them. We have blankets, we have food, we can help you get warm. The oldest child, a girl with long black hair, smiled at me. When she spoke, her voice was sweet and musical. Been so cold for so long. You look warm. You look so wonderfully warm. Something in the way she said it made my skin crawl. But they were children. Lost children who needed help. The little girl reached Maria first. When her small hand touched Maria's arm, my partner screamed. Not a yell of surprise. A scream of pure agony. Maria jerked backward, pulling off her glove. Her hand was white, not pale, white, like fresh snow. Frost covered her, fingers and palm. Frostbite. Severe frostbite, the kind that happens after hours in sub-zero weather. But it was still 60 degrees according to the base weather station. Don't touch them, I shouted, grabbing Maria and pulling her away. Don't let them touch you. The children stopped walking. 7 pairs of dark eyes stared at us with expressions that weren't quite right, too old for their young faces. Too hungry. You're warm, the oldest girl said again. We've been cold for so long. Won't you share your warmth with us? That's when I understood. These weren't lost children. They weren't children at all. Cherokee, Maria gasped, cradling her frostbitten hand. The Cherokee children, the ones who died. I knew the story. Every ranger in North Georgia knew it. In 1838, during the forced removal the Cherokee called the Trail Where They Cried, a family had tried to hide on Blood Mountain. 7 children, ages 5 to 10. The soldiers found them in Balt, November, drove them down the mountain in a snowstorm. The children never made it to the camps. They died of exposure on the mountain, their bodies never found. We died here, the oldest girl said, her voice carrying on the wind like music. Died cold and afraid. So cold, always cold. The 7 children began to move again, spreading out to surround us. Their bare feet left no prints in the snow, but everywhere they stepped, the temperature dropped another degree. We learned to take warmth from the mountain animals, said a boy who looked about 8. Rabbits, deer, birds. But it's never enough, never lasts. Human warmth is different, added another girl. Human warmth fills us up, makes us feel alive again. I pulled Maria to her feet. Her lips were turning blue, but I didn't think it was from the cold. The touch of that child had done something to her, started something that was spreading through her body. How many? I asked. How many people have you killed? Not killed, the oldest girl said sadly. We don't mean to hurt anyone. We just need to be warm. Need to feel what it's like to be alive again. Harold, I said, you took his warmth. The weatherman was kind. He saw us playing and wanted to help. He opened his arms to us. The girl's expression grew even sadder. We tried to take just a little, but when you've been cold for so long, it's hard to stop. The mist around us began to swirl faster. Through it, I could see shapes, buildings, trees, a landscape that didn't match the mountain I knew. I was seeing the mountain as it had been in 1838, seeing it through their eyes. A small log cabin where a Cherokee family had hidden. Soldiers on horseback. Children running through the snow, crying for their mother. The slow, terrible cold that crept into their bones as they lay hidden under a rocky overhang, too scared to light a fire that might give them away. You don't have to do this, I said. You can rest. You can let go. Can't, whispered the youngest, a boy who couldn't have been older than 5 when he died. Can't get warm enough to sleep. Can't get warm enough to go away. Maria was getting worse. The frostbite was spreading up her arm, and she was shivering so hard she could barely stand. Whatever the ghost child had done to her was killing her slowly. The children moved closer. Their breath came out in white puffs, even though they didn't breathe. The air around them shimmered with cold. Just let us touch you, the oldest girl pleaded. Just for a moment. We'll try to be gentle this time. I had one chance, one idea that might work. My pack held emergency supplies, including waterproof matches and a small can of camp fuel. I grabbed them both. You want warmth? I said, backing toward a pile of dry pine branches that had collected against a boulder. I'll give you warmth. I emptied the fuel over the wood and struck a match. The fire blazed up, instantly, hot and bright in the gray mist. For a moment, The flames seemed to push back the fog, and I could see the real mountain again, the familiar trees, the normal rocks, the sky above. The children stopped moving. 7 pairs of eyes fixed on the fire with an expression of pure longing. "Fire," breathed the oldest girl. "Real fire. Warm fire." They moved toward the flames like sleepwalkers. Not toward me and Maria anymore, toward the fire. The oldest girl knelt by the blaze and held out her hands. The others gathered around her. For just a moment, they looked alive again. The flames reflected in their dark eyes, brought color to their pale cheeks. They looked like what they should have been, children warming themselves by a campfire. "So warm," the little boy whispered, "so warm and bright." But they weren't solid enough to really feel it. They were ghosts, and the fire was real. They could see it, could remember what warmth felt like, but they couldn't truly touch it, which meant they'd turn back to us soon. I grabbed Maria and ran. Behind us, I heard the oldest girl call out, "Wait, don't leave us cold again." But we kept running, crashing through the mist, following the slope of the mountain downward. I didn't care which direction anymore. Down was good enough. Down led away from the ghost children and their deadly touch. The mist began to thin as we lost altitude. By the time we reached 3,000 feet, I could see the trail again. By 2,500 feet, the sun was shining and the temperature was back to a normal spring afternoon. Maria's frostbite stopped spreading once we got below the mist, but her hand was damaged permanently. 3 fingers on her left hand never worked quite right after that. We made it back to base camp just after dark. Jim Patterson took one look at us. Maria's frozen hand, my story about Harold's aged body, our reports of ghost children in the mist, and called in the state police, the medical examiner, and a mental health counselor. The medical examiner confirmed that Harold Jenkins had died of natural causes, but couldn't explain the rapid aging. "Might be some kind of rare genetic condition triggered by stress," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. The state police found Harold's body exactly where we'd left it. They also found the weather station empty and undamaged. The automated equipment was working perfectly, sending normal readings back to base camp. No trace of children, no footprints in snow that had melted away, no sign that anyone else had been on the mountain. The official report listed Harold's death as natural causes, possibly related to pre-existing medical condition. My account of ghost children was noted but not included in the formal findings. 3 weeks later, I put in for a transfer. "Why Arizona?" Jim asked. "You love these mountains." "Need a change," I told him. I didn't say that I couldn't sleep anymore, that every fog bank looked like reaching fingers, that I heard children's voices in every mountain wind. I didn't tell him that I'd done some research on Blood Mountain and found 12 other deaths over the past 50 years. Hikers found frozen solid in July, campers who aged decades overnight. Always during times when unusual mist was reported in the area, Maria transferred too, took a job with the Park Service in Florida. We don't talk about what happened on Blood Mountain. What would be the point? No one would believe us. But sometimes, on the anniversary, I get a phone call from a ranger in North Georgia. Another weather station operator has gone missing. Another hiker found dead from impossible causes. More reports of children's voices in the mist. The weather station on Blood Mountain is fully automated now. No more human operators. The Park Service installed cameras and motion sensors, but they don't work when the mist rolls in. Something about the presents the to him. Atmospheric conditions interferes with electronic equipment. I'm retired now, living in Phoenix, where the sun shines 300 days a year, and the only mist comes from lawn sprinklers. But I still follow the weather reports from North Georgia. Still check the news for stories about Blood Mountain. Last month, there was another incident. A family of hikers found dead from hypothermia in 80-degree weather. The news story mentioned unusual atmospheric conditions and localized cold spots. It also mentioned that before they died, the hikers had radioed for help, reporting that children were lost on the mountain. 7 children, the radio transcript said. Ages 5 to 10, they're so cold, they need help getting warm. I think about Harold Jenkins sometimes, how he'd wanted to help those children. I think about the Cherokee family that hid on that mountain in 1838 and how their children never made it down alive. Mostly, I think about that moment by the fire, when the ghost children looked almost alive again, almost at peace. But they're still up there, still cold, still looking for warmth they can never really find. If you ever hike Blood Mountain and the mist rolls in, remember this. If you hear children calling for help, don't answer. If you see small shapes moving through the fog, don't approach them. And whatever you do, don't let them touch you. Some kindness comes with too high a price. Some cold goes too deep to ever heal. My name is Robert McLeod, and that's the truth about what happened on Blood Mountain. I don't expect you to believe it, but if you ever find yourself alone in the mist, remembering this story might just save your life. My name is David Carver, and I've been a park ranger at Shenandoah National Park for 15 years. People think my job is all about helping lost hikers and fighting forest fires, but the truth is, I spend most of my time protecting old things, ancient things, things that were here long before any of us. I used to be a geology professor before I took this job. My wife Sarah always said I loved rocks more than people, and maybe she was right. There's something honest about stone. It doesn't lie, doesn't pretend to be something it's not, unlike people. That October morning in 1978 started like any other. The leaves were turning brilliant red and gold, and the mountain air was so crisp it made your lungs ache. I was sitting in my office at the ranger station when the call came in. 4 graduate students from the University of Virginia had been missing for 4 days. They were studying some old Indian stone circles up on Old Rag Mountain. Sheriff Morrison told me over the DASIS phone. Their professor called it in yesterday when they didn't show up for their scheduled check-in. I knew the area he was talking about, the old quarry site at 3,200 feet, where the Monacan Indians used to hold ceremonies hundreds of years ago. It was a 6-hour hike from the nearest road, through some of the roughest terrain in the park. Most visitors never made it up there. What were they studying exactly? I asked, already reaching for my hiking gear. Some kind of archaeological survey, looking for pre-Columbian artifacts, stone arrangements, that sort of thing. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. The Monacan elders had always warned people to stay away from that place. They called it sacred ground. My grandmother, who was part Monacan herself, used to tell stories about the singing stones up there, how they would hum and whistle when the wind was just right. I'll head up there this morning, I told Morrison. Probably just got turned around in the Belian fog. Happens all the time. But as I packed my gear, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Really wrong. The hike to the quarry site normally took me about 5 hours, but I pushed hard that day. The trail wound through dense forest, past waterfalls and granite outcroppings that jutted from the mountainside like broken teeth. The higher I climbed, the quieter it became. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I found their base camp first, 4 tents arranged in a neat square, equipment carefully organized under tarps. Everything was clean and dry, like they'd just stepped away for a few minutes. But there was no sign of the students anywhere. Their research notes were still spread out on a folding table, held down by rocks. I picked up the top sheet and read the careful handwriting. Day 3. Excavation proceeding well. Stone circle, approximately 20 feet in diameter. Carved symbols becoming visible as we clear away centuries of leaf litter and soil. Dr. Morgan believes this could be one of the oldest Monacan ceremonial sites in Virginia. Stones appear to be locally quarried granite, but arrangement suggests sophisticated astronomical knowledge. The last entry was dated 3 days ago. I followed their equipment trail toward the excavation site, about 100 yards uphill from the camp. What I found there made me stop dead in my tracks. They had uncovered part of an ancient stone circle, just like the notes described. Huge granite blocks, each one taller than a man, arranged in a perfect ring. Strange symbols were carved deep into the stone, spirals and lines that seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking directly at them. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was the silence. Complete, absolute silence. And underneath that silence, so faint I almost missed it, was a sound like humming, like the stones themselves were singing. I spent the rest of that day searching the area around the excavation site, calling out the students' names until my voice was hoarse. Elizabeth Morgan, James Wright, Sarah Chen, and Marcus Rodriguez. I found their tools scattered around the stone circle, brushes, trowels, measuring tape, but no sign of struggle. It was like they had simply vanished into thin air. As the sun started to set, I made camp near their tents. I'd hiked these mountains for 15 years, and I'd never felt anything like what I felt that night. The forest was too quiet, too still, and that humming sound from the stones kept getting louder. I tried my radio, but got nothing but static. The mountains sometimes blocked signals, so that wasn't unusual. But when I checked my compass, the needle was spinning slowly in circles. That definitely wasn't normal. I was heating up a can of beans on my camping stove when I heard it, a voice calling from somewhere in the darkness beyond the excavation site. "Help, please. Help me." It was faint, but definitely human. A woman's voice. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the sound, my heart pounding. "Hello? Where are you?" "Here, I'm here. Can't move." The voice was coming from the stone circle. I climbed over the low wall they'd built around the excavation and shined my light across the ancient granite blocks. That's when I saw her. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan was embedded in one of the standing stones, not tied to it, not pressed against it, actually inside it, like the granite had grown around her body. Her face and part of her chest were still visible. The rest of her disappeared into solid rock. But the worst part was that she was still alive. Her eyes tracked my movement, blinking in the flashlight beam. Her mouth moved, trying to speak, but no sound came out. I ran to her, pressing my hands against the stone where her body disappeared. The granite was warm to the touch, almost like living flesh. I could feel something moving underneath, like a slow pulse. "Elizabeth, can you hear me? What happened?" Her lips formed words, but I couldn't hear them. I leaned closer and finally caught a whisper so faint it might have been the wind. "They're angry. We disturbed them." The humming from the stones was getting louder now, rising and falling like a slow heartbeat. The sound seemed to come from inside my head as much as from the rocks themselves. It made my teeth ache and my vision blur. I tried to dig around the edges where Elizabeth merged with the stone, but it was no use. The granite was solid, natural, like she had always been part of it. Whatever had happened here, it was beyond anything I'd learned in geology school. That's when I noticed the other 3 stones in the circle. Each one had a vague human shape pressed into its surface, like shadows burned into the granite. Arms, legs, faces just barely visible in the rock. James, Sarah, and Marcus turned into stone just like Elizabeth. But unlike Elizabeth, they weren't moving anymore. I backed away from the circle, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. People didn't get turned into stone. That was fairy tale stuff, not something that happened in the real world. The humming grew louder, and I felt something strange happening to my left hand. I looked down and saw that my fingers were turning gray. Not cold gray, stone gray. The color was spreading up my wrist like an infection. I ran. I stumbled through the darkness back to my camp, my head spinning from whatever the stones were doing to me. The gray color on my hand was fading, but I could still feel something wrong underneath my skin, something hard and cold. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my sleeping bag, listening to the stones sing their ancient song. Every time I started to drift off, the humming would get louder, and I'd feel that creeping coldness in my hand again. When morning came, I knew I had 2 choices. I could hike back down the mountain, call for backup, and try to explain what I'd seen. Or I could stay and try to figure out what was happening before anyone else got hurt. The smart thing would have been to leave, but I kept thinking about Elizabeth's eyes, still alive and aware inside that granite prison. I couldn't abandon her. Not yet. I spent the morning going through the students' research materials, looking for any clue about what they might have disturbed. Their notes mentioned that the stone circle was much older than anyone had thought, possibly dating back over 1,000 years. They'd found evidence of continuous use by the Monacan people right up until the 1800s, when white settlers started quarrying granite from the mountain. One entry caught my attention, asterisk. Local oral histories speak of guardian spirits inhabiting the stones. Monacan elders warned against disturbing the circle, claiming the stones themselves were alive. Fascinating, the example of animistic beliefs surrounding sacred sites. Asterisk, Dr. Morgan had written that note 3 days ago with the confident tone of someone who thought she was studying primitive superstitions. Now, she was part of the stones herself. I found a detailed map of the excavation in their files. They'd been carefully removing centuries of soil and debris from inside the circle, exposing more of the carved symbols. According to their notes, the symbols seemed to tell a story. Something about a bargain made between the Monacan people and the spirits of the mountain. The more I read, the clearer it became that the students had uncovered something they shouldn't have. The stone circle wasn't just a ceremonial site, it was a prison. Around noon, I heard footsteps crunching through the leaves behind me. I spun around, hoping against hope that one of the missing students had somehow escaped. Instead, I saw James Wright walking slowly toward the camp. At least, it looked like James. But something was wrong with the way he moved, too stiff, too mechanical, and his skin had a gray, mottled appearance like weathered granite. "James," I called out. "Thank God you're okay. Where have you been?" He didn't answer, just kept walking toward me with that strange, jerky gait. As he got closer, I could see that parts of his body were already transforming. His left arm was solid stone from the elbow down. Gray veins spread across his neck and face like cracks in old marble. "We have to go back," he said, his voice hollow and echoing like it was coming from inside a cave. "They're calling." "Who's calling, James? What happened to you?" But he was already turning away, walking back toward the stone circle. I followed him, my hand instinctively moving to the radio on my belt. Still nothing but static. James led me back to the excavation site, where the ancient stones hummed louder than ever. The sound was different now, more complex, like a chorus of voices singing in harmony. I could almost make out words in the melody, though I didn't recognize the language. James walked directly to one of the standing stones and pressed his back against it. I watched in horror as the granite began to flow around him like thick mud, pulling him into its embrace. Within minutes, he was completely absorbed, just another face pressed into the ancient rock. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that he was smiling. That's when I understood what was really happening here. The stones weren't just turning people into granite, they were collecting them, adding them to something bigger, something ancient and patient and hungry. I turned to run, but found my way blocked by Sarah Chen. Or what had been Sarah Chen. She was further along in the transformation than James had been, more stone than flesh. When she spoke, her voice sounded like rocks grinding together. "David, you came. They knew you would." "Who knew? Who are they?" "The Guardians. They've been waiting so long." Sarah's transformation was almost complete, but she was still moving, still talking. The stones weren't killing them. They were making them part of something else. Something that had been waiting under this mountain for centuries. The Monacan made a deal. She continued, her words coming slower as the stone claimed more of her throat. Protection. For the mountain. In exchange for guardians. What kind of guardians? But Sarah was already walking back to her stone, drawn by the humming song. I watched her merge with the granite, her face disappearing into the ancient rock with an expression of peaceful surrender. I was alone now, but I could feel them watching me. All 4 students, absorbed into the stones but still aware, still conscious. The humming grew louder, more insistent, and I felt that cold, creeping sensation spreading up my left arm again. Our time, it didn't stop. I looked down and saw my hand turning to granite before my eyes. Not gray skin, actual stone. My fingers locked in place, unable to bend. The transformation was spreading faster now, racing up my forearm toward my elbow. The song of the stones filled my head, drowning out my own thoughts. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time, older than civilization, older than human memory. It spoke of patience and duty and eternal watching. It promised peace, rest, an end to the loneliness of mortal flesh. For a moment, I almost gave in. It would be so easy to walk to one of the empty stones and let it claim me, to become part of something vast and timeless, to join the guardians who protected this sacred place. But then I thought of my wife Sarah, waiting for me at home, my teenage son Mark, who was supposed to start college next year, the life I still had to live, the people who needed me. I fought against the song with every ounce of will I had left. The pain of resisting the stone's call was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It felt like my soul was being torn in half. Part of me wanted to surrender, to become one with the ancient guardians. But the human part of me, The part that remembered love and laughter and Sunday morning pancakes refused to let go. I stumbled away from the stone circle, my left arm now granite up to the shoulder. The weight of it threw off my balance, and I kept falling to my knees in the leaf litter. But I kept moving, driven by a desperate need to understand what was happening before it was too late. In the students' research files, I found what I was looking for, a translation of some of the symbols they'd uncovered. Dr. Morgan had been working with a Monacan elder named Joseph Crow Feather to interpret the carvings. According to his translation, the stone circle was built as part of an ancient compact. When white settlers started dynamiting and quarrying the mountain in the core, 1,780 seconds, the Monacan people made a deal with the mountain spirits. They would provide guardians, volunteers who would merge with the stones and protect the sacred site forever. In return, the spirits would allow the Monacan people to leave safely and find new homes away from the destruction. But the compact required a specific number of guardians, 12 in total. The 4 students brought the count to 11. The stones needed one more to complete their circle of protection. They needed me. That's why my radio wasn't working, why my compass spun in circles, why I'd been drawn to this place just when the stones awakened. It wasn't coincidence, it was destiny. The mountain spirits had been calling to me, using the missing students as bait. The humming grew louder, more insistent. I could hear voices now, speaking in the old language. The students' voices, and others, much older, speaking with the authority of centuries. Asterisk, come home, stonecutter, take your place, among the guardians. Asterisk, asterisk, your knowledge of the rock will serve us well. Asterisk, asterisk, no more loneliness, no more doubt, only the eternal song. Asterisk. The transformation was spreading to my chest now. I could feel my ribs hardening, my heart slowing to match the deep, patient rhythm of the mountain itself. Part of me welcomed it. The stone felt solid, permanent, free from the fears and worries that plagued human flesh. But I thought of Sarah again, of the way she smiled when I brought her wild flowers from my hikes. I thought of Mark teaching me to play his guitar, his young hands guiding mine across the strings. I thought of all the hikers I'd helped over the years, all the people who depended on rangers like me to keep them safe. I couldn't become a guardian. I had to find another way. That's when I noticed something in the students' notes that I'd missed before. Joseph Crow Feather hadn't just translated the symbols, he'd also provided instructions for what he called restoration ritual, a way to appease the mountain spirits if the compact was ever broken. The stones had to be returned to their original positions. The excavation had to be undone. The sacred circle had to be restored exactly as it was before the students disturbed it. With my one good arm, I began the back-breaking work of moving rocks and soil. The students had been methodical in their excavation, carefully documenting every layer they removed. Their notes became my roadmap as I worked to undo months of archaeological work. The stone guardians watched me labor, their voices growing more urgent in the ancient song. They didn't want the circle restored, they wanted completion. They wanted their 12th guardian, but as I worked, something strange happened. The more soil I replaced, the more artifacts I reburied, the quieter the humming became. The transformation in my body slowed, then stopped altogether. My left arm remained granite, but the creeping coldness retreated from my chest. It took me 6 hours to restore the excavation site, 6 hours of moving rocks and dirt with one functioning arm while the ancient voices pleaded and threatened and cajoled. By the time I finished, the sun was setting again, and the stone circle looked exactly as it had for the past 200 years. Peaceful, ordinary, completely buried under centuries of forest debris. The humming stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something that made my heart leap. Car engines, far down the mountain. Sheriff Morrison and his search team, finally close enough for me to hear them coming. I looked back at the stone circle one last time. The carved symbols were hidden again, the ancient compact sealed away under soil and leaves. But I could still feel the guardians sleeping beneath the surface, patient and eternal, waiting for the next disturbance, waiting for someone else to wake them up. The official report stated that the 4 University of Virginia graduate students died in a rockslide caused by seismic activity. The excavation site was declared geologically unstable and permanently closed to public access. Their bodies were never found, of course. How do you explain to grieving families that their children have become part of the mountain itself? My left arm never changed back. 27 years later, I still carry that piece of granite with me wherever I go. The doctors call it an unusual mineralization condition and want to study it, but I always refuse. Some things are better left unexplained. I retired from the Park Service 5 years ago, but I still hike up to Old Rag Mountain every few months, just to check on things, to make sure the restoration is holding. The stone circle remains buried, and the guardians sleep peacefully in their granite prisons. Most of the time, on nights when the moon is full and the wind is just right, hikers sometimes report hearing strange sounds from the old quarry. Sight. A low humming, they say. Like voices singing in harmony, like the mountain itself is dreaming. I always tell them it's just the wind through the rock formations. Just natural acoustics, nothing more. Most people believe me. They want to believe me. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I hear the song too. Faint, but unmistakable, carried on the mountain air. The guardians, calling to me across the miles, reminding me that I'm the only one left who knows the truth about what happened up there. The only one who can make sure it never happens again. My wife Sarah died 3 years ago. Cancer, not stones. My son Mark is a doctor now, married with kids of his own. They think I'm just a lonely old man who spends too much time in the mountains. They don't understand why I keep hiking up to that remote quarry site, why I insist on checking on things that should be left alone. I've never told them about the stone guardians. Never explained why my left arm is made of granite, or why I wake up sometimes with dirt under my fingernails and no memory of how it got there. Some knowledge is too dangerous to share, even with family. Especially with family, because I know what I am now. I'm not quite human anymore, but I'm not fully stone either. I'm something in between. A living reminder of the compact between the mountain spirits and the people who disturb their rest. Part of me will always belong to that ancient circle, and part of them will always be with me. The guardians are patient. They've waited 200 years already. They can wait a little longer. But they're still down there, sleeping in their granite prison. Still aware, still watching, still ready to protect their sacred ground from anyone foolish enough to disturb it again. And sometimes, when the wind is just right and the moon is full, I swear I can hear them singing, waiting for the next group of curious researchers to come digging in the wrong place, waiting for their 12th guardian to finally come home.